Word. All right. Well, thank you all for coming. My name is Evgeny Dengub. I'm a professor of Russian and director of the Center for Languages and Cultures. I'm grateful to my colleagues and especially Julia Chamberlain, who is here, with whom we started this series aimed for our ALs, assistant lecturers, graduate students, especially those who are on the job market or close to that exciting point in their career, who might need some, input, some expertise, some advice on how to position themselves as language teachers. If you apply for jobs teaching language or jobs that include teaching language, this series is intended to help you through various stages of this process. So we'll start with this very brief and skeletal orientation into language pedagogy jargon and lingo. We'll talk about frameworks. It will be a very brief introduction, so but hopefully you will get some useful kind of ideas where to look for more information if you need it. And then we'll have a series of conversations where we will meet with faculty who were on various search committees. We'll also have mock interviews. Please, take advantage. It sounds super scary and super, but it's good. So yes, you will be interviewed by a panel of faculty. Yes, there will be others observing you and talking about this. But that's the kind of it's by design. It's stressful by design. So when you come to the actual interview, it's not so stressful. Also, we are happy to look at your statement that you wrote and give you feedback. So there are the CLC webpage that I'll ask Julia to actually throw in the chart, if Julia, if you can, will have that all of the information and the links. All right, but today we're going to talk about contemporary foreign language teaching frameworks and concepts. I call it what every instructor needs to know. I mean, we'll probably disagree on the actual kind of composition and a list of things that we should know, but I try to include sort of the very basics of concepts, very basic concepts and frameworks that we use here in this country. So it might not be the same in Canada or Russia or France, but in the United States, that's what we mostly use when we describe what we do. So, and we should certainly start, and maybe that's where we end, with ACTFL, our main professional organization, American Councils of Teachers of Foreign Languages, that bring together thousands of professionals across the country and the world, and this is the leader and the kind of organization from which various frameworks and I don't want to say theories, but concepts come from, and that's this organization kind of coordinates work of various projects that we'll talk about today. So consider joining ACTFL, consider going to the conferences. It's a big organization, and I know we all have Association of French or Russian or Portuguese, but being part of ACTFL is certainly one of the kind of a lot of people are members of ACTFL, and that's important to be part of that community. And ACTFL website has tons of resources that we'll explore some of them today, but I encourage you to go to their website and look for new things to read and to watch. All right, so the first thing I'd like to talk to you about is called World Readiness Standards for Learning Languages. aka 5Cs. 5Cs because these 5 standards, communication, cultures, connections, comparisons, communities, they all conveniently starts with the letter C. So, and they all describe what our foreign language classroom should focus on. And the idea here is that you see those kind of circles that are interrelated, and they did their best to kind of avoid the hierarchy, although, you know, communication is probably would be, you know, it is on top in their logo, and it's certainly one of the main thing we do in the language classroom. But the idea is that we teach language not just so that students know what passé composé is, or what cases are, or what verbs of motion are. We teach language so students can communicate, so they learn about the cultures, they make connections between cultures and, you know, various countries and languages, they make comparisons, and they become part of the communities. So it's a useful reminder for us, and also a good framework to, you know, build your syllabus around your lesson plan. Are you addressing as many of these 5Cs as possible? When you teach a class, do you go beyond language, grammar? Do you, you know, address the communication standard? Do you address culture? If you do this too, great. What about communities? Can you incorporate the community standards? So that's, I don't necessarily like the title. I don't standards. I think this more of a guidelines for us. Unfortunately, there's another document that's called guidelines, which we'll talk about later. But this for me is a sort of a guide, what I should be remembering to do with my students as I plan the lesson. Now, let me just give you a quick example of connections. So connections standards say that students need to connect with other disciplines and acquire information and diverse perspectives in order to use the language to function in academic and career-related situations. And they break it down into 2 kind of a sub standards: making connections and acquire information in diverse perspectives. This is intentionally broad, intentionally kind of vague, because it's, you know, not language specific, right, and not age specific. So I should say that I don't know, colleagues from who teach other languages, but at least in Russian, I see my K-12 colleagues use those the most. So if you're looking for a job in high school and middle school, you should probably be expected to be familiar with this more than it is in college. But, you know, some colleges certainly, you know, use this framework, and certainly the language of the framework helps you talk about language teaching philosophy and prepare the statement. So you can find the brief summary of the World Readiness Standards for Learning Languages on ACTFL website. Here's the link. Or you can purchase or download the book if you want to.
No, thank you.
Is there a question?
No.
No? Okay, excellent. So the very an important standard is communication, and here ACTFL introduces or reminds us about the 3 modes of communication: interpersonal, interpretive, and presentational. So that's another framework, another concept that you should be aware of, the modes of communication. So interpersonal communication has to do with interaction of meaning, negotiation of meaning, and spoken or written conversation. So it includes all 4 skills: listening, reading, writing, and speaking. Whenever you have a conversation or text message exchange or email exchange, that is interpersonal communication. Whereas presentational communication is what I'm doing right now, right? Is, there's very little interaction, sorry about that, but my goal is to present the information, inform you of what's happening in the foreign language world, and you are just, passive recipients of this. So, reports like this, presentations, come under the umbrella of presentational communication. And interpretive communication is what we read and hear. So reading and listening come under the umbrella of interpretive communication. So learners interpret what they hear or read. So it is very important to address all 3 types of communications, in modes of communication in your class. So when you devise your lesson plan, when you work on your syllabus, you should always pause and think, okay, so what am I doing with my students? What are my students doing in this activity, in that activity, in that activity? Is all my communicative activities of the same type? Are all of them of the same type? Or do I have enough variety of a good mix of presentational and, say, interpersonal? And also, what do I test? If what we did in class was mostly dialogues and kind of a brief conversations, why is my test prepare a report or make a presentation about your family? So there's like mismatch here. Ideally, you should be testing what you taught, and the types of activities and things you include in a test should mirror as much as possible types of activities you did in class. So I'm making this mistake myself oftentimes, because preparing the presentation is easy, and kind of evaluating this presentation is easier, and logistics of presentation versus dialogue or role play is much easier. So we kind of fall into the trap while we focus on presentational communication when we test, but oftentimes the classroom activities are mostly interpersonal communication. Any questions so far? All right, and can I ask you to raise your virtual hand if you have a question? This way you will get on the top of my list screen, so I will see that you have a question. Otherwise, I will only see very few people on top. All right. Okay, so another important document is Actual Proficiency Guidelines of 2012 edition. So if you had to read one thing from ACTFL, that would be Actual Proficiency Guidelines. If you had to attend one workshop from ACTFL or any language teaching workshop, I would highly recommend reading the guidelines and attending the workshop. I don't want to say it changed my life, this workshop, but it did in a way. It certainly was a breakthrough moment for me, understanding what proficiency is, understanding the levels, and this is very important. And this is the documents that we use a lot in this country. Other countries have their own proficiency descriptors. There's a European framework. Russia has their own system. I don't know about other countries, China, Korea, I don't know what they're doing there, but ACTFL Proficiency Guidelines is the core document that's used in this country. So before we get into the proficiency details, I just want to remind you about the difference between performance versus proficiency. Performance is the ability to use language that has been learned and practiced in an instructional setting. So what we did in class. So things we learned in class. This is performance, and this is what we usually test our students. Whereas proficiency is the ability to use language in real world situations in a spontaneous interaction and non-rehearsed context, and in a manner acceptable and appropriate to native speakers of the language. Almost every word is very important here. So the use of language is important. Real world situation and spontaneous interaction, non-rehearsed context, and an acceptable manner. So all of this is our primary goal, or should be our primary goal, to to teach our learners so that they are able to use the language in non-rehearsed context in a manner that is acceptable to the native speakers. What we do in class is baby steps, or steps towards proficiency. So when we drill a verb, être in French, that's a required step in order for me to use language in the real world situation. I cannot really be a proficient speaker at the high level of proficiency without knowing how to conjugate verbs. So, and it's a huge question about the place of grammar, and I'm sure all of us who've taught language would have something to say on that topic. But I see it as an important, crucial, essential step. But if you only do just that, if you only conjugate verbs in class, your students might be masters of verb conjugation. So you wake them at night and they will conjugate any verb and will do it beautifully. But they won't be able to order a cup of coffee in a French cafe, which is intimidating, even I guess for advanced speakers. But focusing just on the language structures won't get you to high level of proficiency. So we should create opportunities in class for our students to use the language in real world situation and spontaneous interactions. It will be approximation, it will be sort of modeling, it will be like real world situation, as close to spontaneous interaction, but this should be done each class. This should be done, this practice, this opportunity should be created each class. All right, so go back to actual proficiency guidelines. So again, I highly recommend that you read those guidelines. They're available in English and in translation into many different languages. So an actual website has examples of the different proficiency levels, videos and audio recordings. The proficiency guidelines come for all 4 skills: reading, listening, speaking, and writing. But we mostly use oral proficiency guidelines. That's kind of our main part of those guidelines. So what do the guidelines tell us? The guidelines tell us that there are 5 major levels of proficiency, going from novice, intermediate, advanced, superior, and distinguished. And the first 4 are subdivided into 3 sub-levels each: low, mid, high. So we get novice low, novice mid, novice high. By the way, I recommend that you remember how this is spelled and the word order, so you use those titles correctly, whether you describe your proficiency on your CV, or when you talk about in your language statement, in your pedagogy statement. Just make sure it's intermediate, high, no hyphen, capitalized I. So things like that, details like that matter, at least for me, when I see that person did the homework and they know what they're talking about. And they present this level, which each level is described through a text, which we'll look at a little later. But this famous pyramid is a good example and a good reminder that, language acquisition, well, first of all, is a continuum. Then it gets harder, as I'm sure all of us know, as we go higher. It's really easy and really relatively fast to go from novice low to novice mid, novice high, right? But as you enter intermediate and advanced levels of proficiency, the amount of things you need to master, increases in geometrical progression. So that's why our students who get to level to third year, sometimes second year, they feel so frustrated because they feel like they're not moving anywhere. They're stuck. They are not acquiring language as fast as they did in level 1 and level 2. So showing them that pyramid is really helpful to say, look, guys, I get your frustration, but that's how it is. This is how we are acquiring languages. So it will be harder and it'll take longer for you to get from intermediate to advanced. So just be patient. It happens, and it's happening. You're making progress. You are kind of deepening your knowledge of the language. You're honing your skills, but it just takes more time. So that's an important reminder for us all. So these 4 levels, let me just focus on these 4 major levels. So novice level can communicate minimally with formulaic and rote utterances. They produce lists and phrases. Intermediate level speakers can create with language, ask and answer simple questions on familiar topics, and handle a simple situation or transaction. And create here means produce non-rehearsed language, something that they didn't say before, something that's, it doesn't have to be, create, doesn't mean poem, writing a poem or a novel. It just means producing non-rehearsed materials. Advanced level speakers can create and describe in all major timeframes and handle situation with a complication. If your car broke, you could call and explain what happened. Or if your little brother came home from a hairdresser and you realize, oh, they did a terrible job, you would be able to call them and explain what's wrong. So that's a situation with a complication. And superior level speakers can support opinion, hypothesize, discuss topics concretely and abstractly, and handle a linguistically unfamiliar situation. So this has just a very brief description of each level. And again, these are not language specific, and that's the strength and weakness of proficiency guidelines. So they are applicable to all languages, but they do not take into consideration kind of peculiarities of each language we teach. So something in Russian might be, at the advanced level might be easier or harder. For example, narrating in Russian, I would argue, telling a story is so much harder because you have to know, vocabulary, have to know the aspect, manipulate with aspect and the tense, and all of that. So it's actually much easier to present a hypothesis because grammatically speaking, syntactically speaking, is less complicated than telling a story, especially the one that involves movement. So usually at this workshop, they show us this pictures, parrot as a metaphor for novice level speakers who can repeat what we said, but not able to really create, and the tourist who knows kind of a bare minimum and is able to survive in the target culture environment, a reporter who is able to give you a gist and kind of narrate the facts and tell what happened, and the thinker who is able to go on and go on any topic and kind of present any kind of argument, any kind of a hypothesis. When we define proficiency, we ask ourselves 5 basic questions: why, what, where, how well, and how much. So, and that gives the and that creates this framework of these factors such as function, content, context, accuracy, and text type. We won't go into details in each of them, but this is, again, a useful reminder for us that it's not just accuracy we should focus on. It's not just how much text type our students are saying. It's all of this 5. All of this are what kind of functions are they able to perform at each level? So are they able to ask questions? Are they able to narrate? Are they able to hypothesize? And for at each level, we address a certain functions. And for many of us, or for many of our students, reaching advanced level proficiency becomes a kind of a goal, at least in the 4-year sequence that they have in the classroom. Rarely, almost never, our students achieve superior level of proficiency in the classroom alone, if they had significant time abroad, or went to Middlebury 3 summers in a row, maybe. But for many of them, advanced level speech is sort of the goal. And quickly after we're done with the basics of the language in 120 and 150, our goal becomes to address the functions of advanced, because that's where we want our students to be. That's the level that's usually required by various government agencies. Teaching certification, advanced law is sort of the minimum requirement for astronauts on the space. So it's important for us to think about advanced level functions as we plan our course and lesson. Again, after we kind of we're done with the basics in first year Russian and maybe 3rd semester Russian. Brady, I see you have a question.
Yeah, I'm curious how actively your students know these proficiency guidelines and the goals. Are they focused primarily on those benchmarks, or are they like working through the textbook and trying to pass? Like the mindset of your students, how is that?
That's a great question, Brady. Thank you for asking. It depends. Sometimes I describe this and I talk to them about the proficiency, especially at the higher levels, and when we need to understand where we are, when we need to understand what's happening with our language acquisition. So starting with the 4th semester, 5th semester, I would probably speak more and say, hey guys, you're at this intermediate level. To get to advance, we need to practice the skills of narration and description. Okay, so in this class, we'll do a lot of like retelling the story, telling what happened. So a good textbook will have those can-do statements, and will explain what students will be able to do from the proficiency standpoint. Not all textbooks do it, but usually good ones do. So the ideally proficiency levels and progression is built in the textbook. So it's there, but I think it's a great idea to talk about proficiency with our students, explain to us. On the CLC website, there's a recording of my brief talk. I think it's 5 or 6 minutes, which I recorded for Brandeis University, that explains proficiency to students. So feel free to find it and send it to your students so they understand what it is. All right, so let's quickly read this, and we'll do it in an interactive way. So you'll tell me which level is being described in that abstract from Proficiency Guidelines. So what do you think? So we have novice, intermediate, advanced, or superior. Beautiful. Intermediate. Yes, it is. It is intermediate. It's the sort of a basic description of intermediate. Each sub-level is described in detail further, but they start with the description of major level. So again, I encourage you to read. Reading it is, is helpful. It's certainly first step, and it'll help you understand how these levels are different. But listen to the examples that are available on the website. Try to start thinking about proficiency levels and what you do in the classroom. But again, if possible, attend the workshop. Here at USC, some time ago, all instructors attended proficiency workshop, and we organized one last year. So if anyone did not do the workshop or that did it a long time ago, let me know. We're still trying to figure out if we're going to offer it next spring or not, but if there's interest, we'll certainly consider organizing the workshop for you. All right, so the proficiency movement led to creation of various assessment tools, and the main one is OPI. You probably heard this acronym. Some of you probably took an OPI, Oral Proficiency Interview. It's a 30-minute conversation that you do with a tester who basically asks you questions, who has a conversation with you. It's semi-flexible, so there's no script, but the tester's goal is to more or less quickly understand what's your floor level and what's your ceiling level. And that's an important concept in language testing, and that's what helps us in our classroom to understand, okay, our students is somewhere in between novice and intermediate, or intermediate and advanced and superior. So we use the floor level as kind of a comfort zone, something we go back to at the beginning of each sequence. But the goal is to reach the ceiling, right? And reach the next level and practice the functions and the target structures of the next level. So that's what the tester would do during the OPI, and that's ideally what we should do in the class. Relatively recently, they created a computer version, and tens of thousands of students and test takers take this OPIC. They have huge contract with Samsung. I think actually the company LTI, Language Test International, is owned by Samsung now. So they test literally, thousands of people across the world. And there's a writing proficiency test, WPT, that measures. I mean, there's also a reading proficiency and listening proficiency test, but these are the three most common ones we use for testing proficiency. They've created an Apple test, which is I can never remember what Apple stands for. Anyway, it's a proficiency test for young learners, so for K-12 system. All of this is administered by Language Testing International. Check the website. They have kind of also nice summaries of the tests and the proficiency levels, and also you or your students, whoever can request individual test through LTI. And again, like I said, try to attend the OPI workshop. If a place where you're at offers OPI workshop, do it, because that will help you. Okay, I also want to, any questions about proficiency, about the levels? It was a very brief introduction. I'm happy to do another workshop when we talk in more detail about proficiency levels, but I just want you to know that, you know, proficiency guidelines exist. This is the standard, this is the norm. These are the names of levels which we use when we talk about language teaching and learning, and you should know how to find more information. Any questions? All right. Another theory, I would say, that's been around for quite a long time, much longer than it should, I think, is so-called language categories. So language difficulties of language, categories of language difficulties. So it comes from FSI, Foreign Service Institute, that at some point declared that all languages are can be categorized by the difficulty, and the difficulty will depend on how many hours it takes to reach advanced level of proficiency. So they put Arabic as category 3, and Latvian is category 2, and Italian is category 1 for English speaker. A lot of people refer to this categories. A lot of people say, oh, you know, we're teaching category 2 language, or yours category 4, blah, blah, blah. I have to say that I have issues with this categories. FSI never show us the data, show us the research behind this. So you will never see, you know, robust data that's saying, okay, well, we put Latvian in category 2 because, you know, we have, you know, 200 speakers who learned Latvian for, you know, 44 weeks and they achieved. So there is no such data. So that's why also, although there might be some truth to it, and intuitively we know that, yeah, for English speaker, Italian is probably easier than Polish, right? You know, cognates and, you know, structure, all of that. But I don't know. I you know, just know it exists, but I would not personally recommend, you know, accepting it as a hard fact. But, you know, it's commonly referred to by or referenced to by many people. All right, going into teaching practices, concepts, and ideas. So we discuss a lot target language use, and again, ACTFL and various other in various other institutions recommend 90% of target language use starting from, basically day one. That's lots of argument about this. What's the percentage should be? Should you only use target language? Can you use target language when explaining grammar? And I think essentially we should decide, we should make the decision based on who we teach, what we teach, and which context, but maximizing the target language use, trying to use as much target language in class and asking our students to maximize that target language use should be our goal. But that's a point for debate and conversation. Another one is authentic texts. Again, ACTFL recommends that we use authentic text as much as possible. It's again another debated issue. Again, it should be our goal, and we should bring as much authenticity to the classroom as possible. It's not just authentic text, it's authentic tasks, authentic questions, authentic behavior. I was observing someone's class the other day, and my colleague was asking, she was practicing the word to smoke, and she asked, "Oh, does your father smoke?" And the student says, "Yes, he does." It's like, "Oh, that's great." And I later told her, well, that's a classic example of, how we react to language. He said, "My father smokes," in a, perfect Russian, but, there's nothing good about, his parents smoking. So the reaction should be, "Oh no," or "Oh," or something, but not, as great. So that's the good example of authentic behavior, authentic reaction. But again, that's a big topic. Another one is sequencing of tasks, and what is commonly referred to as graduate release of responsibility. And a good metaphor for this, I do, we do, you do. Okay, so we come from the stage when it's me, the instructor, showing you, telling you how to do whatever, conjugated verb, narrate a story, describe a picture, exchange a compliment, and then let's do it together. Let me help you. We do it together. And then the final stage is you do without any help. So it's a really important concept, really simple, really easy, but a lot of people miss one of those steps. They even rush to you do, or they stay at I do, or they barely go to we do. So ideally, in your sequence, you should have all three present, and you go from I do through we do to you do. Another one is the balance between fluency and accuracy. And again, this is an important reminder that we should give to our students, how usually one comes at the expense of the other. If I start speaking fast, I'll probably make more mistakes. That actually applies to many things we do in life, not just language. And vice versa, if I want to produce a very correct language, I'll probably have to slow down. And it's okay to do one and not the other. But again, it should be a good mix. And there should be a time in your class when you tell your students, I'm not, correcting any mistakes. So just speak as much as you can, just pour language, and, just do it, just go for it. And there should be times when it say, okay, it's the accuracy time. So we will try to really produce accurate language and focus on the grammar. Degrees of control, it's sort of related to what we've been talking about, but again, it's a useful reminder that if I just say that, Russian or English nouns take S in the plural, that doesn't mean you will be able to produce correct plural forms, even though you might understand, yeah, so English ending for plural noun is S. So conceptually, you got it, you understand. But what about being able to do it and do it correctly? So basically, every language structure, every language element goes through this. Students go through stages of this control, degrees of control: conceptual, partial, full, conceptual, partial, full. And they started the conceptual, started understanding what it is, and then trying to use it in the speech, and maybe making lots of mistakes. That's okay. That's expected. We cannot expect 100% accuracy if we just introduced certain structure. Full control comes often much later, maybe never comes for certain things. So, but that that's an important concept. Formative versus summative assessment. Real quickly, just to tell you that formative assessment is something that this checks for understanding, checks for to make sure our students got a little thing we just did in class. Versus summative would be, a big test at the end of the semester. So our classroom should have as many little formative assessment pieces as possible. That allows you and your students understand where you're at, and what needs to be done to kind of go to the next level. If your only test is the final test at the end of the semester, then you're not helping your students understand where they are in the language development. And another buzzword, popular concept, is called backward design. Backward design tells us that we should start from the end. We should think about what we want our students to be able to do at the end of the class, at the end of the course, at the end of the sequence, how we would test it, and then what we would do in the class. So students would show that they're able to do it. So it's, instead of going what I'm doing in the class and then how I'm going to test it and what we'll be able to do, so we flip it and we start backward. Lately, there's been a lot of conversation about DEI issues, social justice, non-binary students. We at USC will have a fairly large conference in March about inclusivity. So check the CLC website for more information. Another popular buzzword that's emerging now, at least in my field, decolonization. I put a question mark because I don't know what to think about decolonization. I honestly don't know what it is, and I wouldn't be able to kind of explain what exactly decolonization in the language classroom is, but I know a lot of people do talk about it and write books and articles. Very briefly, the concepts that are related to the field of second language acquisition. Sorry about the typo. As you know, SLA, second language acquisition, is legitimate field. It's a branch of applied linguistics, and there are a lot of useful concepts that help us to frame our language classroom and our language teaching approach. One is interlanguage. What our students use is not Russian, is not English, it's interlanguage they create, they mind create using what we teach them, using what they see, what they get through various other inputs, and that's their interlanguage. That's the language that they are learning. Essentially, the concept of fossilization is very important, right? Certain mistakes, certain structures get fossilized, and it's really hard for students to kind of erase them, overcome them. So they just would always make that mistake because it got so ingrained. I see a lot of Peace Corps volunteers who would go abroad and would start, conversing real quickly, but they didn't have a grammatical foundation. So a lot of things got fossilized, and it's so hard to help them, get rid of those fossilized mistakes. Transfer from target language, from L1 to L2, from L2 to L1 is a very important concept. And L1, L2, you will see those abbreviations. L1 is the first language, L2 is the second language. So when we say L2 speakers, means that, I'm an L2 speaker of English. So English is not my first language. And some speakers, some of our students are heritage speakers. That's a huge kind of a trend, huge field in our huge direction of field, looking at heritage speakers, who they are, what they're able to do, and trying to understand how to teach them. Native speaker, very controversial issue. I encourage you to read on what native speaker is and how easy it is to sort of debunk that myth about native speaker, and whether native speaker norm should be something that we look at when we teach our students. Input versus output, something that our students read or hear is the input. Output is that what they produce. These are the second language acquisition concepts. And learning versus teaching versus acquisition. Again, one doesn't equal the other. So if you teach something, it doesn't mean they learn something. And learning something doesn't mean you acquire. So a lot of things we acquire outside of the classroom, without the teacher involved, and even it happens kind of not subconsciously, but without us paying much attention. While a lot of things we teach don't get acquired at all because of there will be multiple reasons for that, but that's not automatic. That if we said something in class, if you taught them, even if you practice that means that this thing would be learned or acquired. All right, at the end of the presentation, I have a few resources. I didn't want to give you a long list, but just a few sites and books that might be useful. I will make this recording and the presentation available on the CLC website, so you can go back to it and use it when and if you need it. And we'll stop here to take your questions. No questions. All right. Means I did a great job, talking about main concepts.